Hello. Hereby I open this academic ceremony in which Michele Esposito will defend the academic thesis From Sound to Meaning, brain-inspired deep neural network for sound recognition. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis, please.
Thank you, Prorector, distinguished members of the committee, colleagues, family, and friends. Thank you to joining me today, and I will discuss now what I've done in my thesis, which is entitled From Sound to Meaning, Brain-Inspired Deep Neural Networks for Sound Recognition. Let's start with a quick auditory experiment here. So I want you to listen to this sound. And now listen to the second one. Now, you probably realize what it is. And here we can see a visual representation of the sounds, which is called spectrogram, which is a way to see the sound as an image. And we can tell that they are different, so the acoustic patterns are different, but they come from the same sound source, which is a dog. So how do we move from raw sound to recognize that these two different sounds come from the same sound sources? This is the main question of this thesis, and let's see how that happens. So a dog barks, and then the sound travels through our ears and reaches the cochlea, where it gets translated into an electrical representation that then goes via the auditory nerve up to the first stop in the brain, which is the early auditory areas of the brain. And then where in this area, low-level sound features such as pitch or loudness are processed, and then they move to the superior temporal gyrus and sulcus, which is a link between the early auditory areas up to the frontal area of the brain, where we actually realize that what we are hearing is a dog barking. Now, being able to understand this process and actually model it accurately matters a lot, because not just because it's just fascinating neuroscience, because we want to understand the brain, but also because it could help us to build better hearing aids or assistive technology that truly understand how we hear sounds the way we do. So to do this, we approached in this way. So for the early auditory areas, we already know quite a bit about how the brain processes sounds, the low-level sound features, and we try to draw this knowledge and build networks, models that actually can track the sounds over time and detect what we are hearing as the sound is unfolding. For the superior temporal gyrus, instead, the picture is less clear. We don't fully know how the brain transforms sounds in something meaningful. We need to understand it, and we need to study this area. And what we did was to compare a wide range of models and check which one can actually match what is happening in this brain, in this area of the brain. For the semantic area, instead, we tried to draw information about models that can actually preserve the semantic of the sounds, of the words, and we try to inform this semantic into networks, into models, and that's what we did in chapter 3. Now, to build and test these models, we needed two key ingredients. First, we needed human data. One is a behavioral data set where participants are asked to sort together sounds based on their acoustic similarity. So here we can see that sounds that are, for example, animal vocalizations are closer to one another, and they're far from a piano playing, for example. Second, we used brain data. So we used the ultra-high field 7 Tesla functional magnetic resonance imaging data, and this technique actually tracks the brain activity when a subject is performing a task. In this case, the task was listening attentively to sounds, and we covered the entire auditory cortex from the axial gyrus, which is the early auditory areas, till the anterior superior temporal gyrus. Then we had to consider also a model playground that we want to test against this data. So we considered pure acoustic models, which are models that can replicate the sound features such as pitch or loudness. For example, pitch or loudness, and it's well established that these representations actually model what is happening in the early auditory areas. Then we consider pure semantic models, which are models that can preserve the relationships between words. So we see here in this example that car and truck are closer together because they are vehicles, and they're far, for example, from the word fish, which is an animal. And lastly, we consider DNNs, deep neural networks. These models are learned from a considerable amount of data, learns how to categorize, in this case, to perform tasks. In this case, how to categorize a sound, and we have the example of a cat meowing, and then the network is able to give us a category. So it learns a fixed set of categories, but we are not that interested in the performances of the network, but rather how we get to this response. So how the network starts from the sound and gets to giving us the response. So what we did was to try to zoom in, unpack these networks, and our hypothesis was that the intermediate representation of this network actually link what is happening in the superior temporal gyrus, and that's what we tested in chapter 2. To measure this match, we need to also a mathematical framework to do so. So here we start with a simple example. We have the similarity matrix here, and we can see that on the x-axis we have sounds, so 3 types of sounds. We have a cat meowing, a dog barking, and a piano playing, and then on the y-axis we have the same sounds. So we compare them, and this is this represents the similarity, how humans can sort together the similarity between sounds. So we have that cat and a dog are in blue, so high similarity, and then we have the piano, that is a musical instrument, is completely different from animal vocalization, and that's why it's yellow. We do the same construction also for the 3 families of model that I mentioned, and then we ask ourselves, how well can this model predict the human data? And for doing so, we used a framework which is called the representational similarity analysis, then give us a score which is called R-square, and the R-square tells us how well a model is actually able to predict the data in the dissimilarity matrix here. In this simple example, we see that the DNNs are the ones that best capture these similarities. What we notice also that there is a dashed line on these graphs which is called noise ceiling and represents the maximum that a model could ever do based on the variability of the data. So if a model is close to that line, it means that it's doing as much as they can to try to predict this data. Then we applied this framework in the superior temporal gyrus, and what we saw was that the DNNs were the ones that were best explaining this area. But we didn't stop there, and we tried also to understand why it was the DNN were the one actually predicting best. So we see here these bubble diagrams. These bubble diagrams showed us, these 3 bubbles showed us the information that each model is carrying. The intersection between these 2 gives us the shared information between the model. And what we see here also, the non-intersection part is the unique part, the unique information that each model is carrying out. And we see that the DNNs are the one with the highest unique information. To understand even more why that, we try to do a layer-by-layer analysis of the network. So we try to predict the data in the superior temporal gyrus per each layer of the DNN. And what we saw was that the intermediate representation were the one that were linking the superior temporal gyrus, so we're matching more with the superior temporal gyrus. And here we see something really important, that is that these models are actually trying to unveil a code in the superior temporal gyrus. And we call this code hyperacoustic space. So it's something that is still not full acoustics, but yet not semantic either yet. So it's something in between, and we hypothesize that this representation is what happens when we hear a sound and we already start having a flavor of the sound, even though we don't know what the sound is. For example, about the sound generation, like an object bouncing or cracking, and so on. So this is one of the main findings on the superior temporal gyrus, and then we also try to do the same on the behavioral data. So again, the task was to sort sounds based on their similarity, and what we found out was the DNN again outperformed the other two models. But when we looked which the portion of information that each model could explain, we saw that the semantic models were the ones showing the highest unique information, and that the DNN were actually taking all a small part of the semantics and a large part of acoustics. Why that? Yeah, because DNNs are trained to categorize fixed sets of categories. So in this case, for example, we have a network that can categorize cat, dog, and piano. But the network doesn't know the relationship between the sounds, so the entities. Instead, the semantic models know the relationship. So they know that cat and dog are both animals, and they're different from a piano. So we asked ourselves, what if we try to inject the semantic into the DNN? And that's what happened. So we developed a model called semantic DNN. So let's see how it works. So we have a sound of a bird chirping, and then the sound is converted into a spectrogram, and then, which is again a way to see the sound as an image. And then this spectrogram is fed to the semantic DNN. And instead of actually categorizing the word as a bird, we try to teach to the network the representation of the word bird from the semantic models. And what we see here, that the model in this case knows that the sound that is just heard lies into a space where all the birds, in this case all the animals, are closer to one another and different from, and far away from the vehicles and the musical instruments. After training this network, we again tried to link with the behavioral data. What we saw was that the semantic DNN were the one outperforming the categorical networks and also the pure semantic models, showing that the information that is carried out from the pure semantic now was injected in the semantic DNN, and that's why we have these improvements in predicting the similarity of natural sounds as perceived by humans. Now, so far, all the DNNs models that I discussed are built on a static view of the sound. So what does it mean? That they treat each sound as a single image. We have a spectrogram, which is an image of the sound, and we give it to a peculiar networks called convolutional neural networks, or CNN. And these are great to spotting patterns into images, and then combine them to recognize what they actually listed, but in this case, what they actually seen. And that's brings us to the question, but not to the question, actually to the affirmation that a sound is not an image. So it's not biologically inspired in this way. So what we tried here, we tried to give the temporal information into the network, and that's what I've done in chapter 4. In chapter 4, we drew inspiration from the early auditory areas of the brain, which are areas that process sound in a very fast, dynamic way, and track the sound, how it changes over time. So based on this knowledge, we built this network that we hope listen as the way as we do. So let's see an example. So here we have, on the top panel, we have the waveform filling over time, and in the same time, the networks, frame by frame of 10 milliseconds, so with a high time resolution, trying to understand what the sound is. And as humans also do, it takes a bit of time before building the confidence of saying, this is a person laughing. And we see it also in the beginning, something really funny, that in the beginning we have that the network try to say, oh, maybe it's laughing, but then it goes down again and then it goes up again, which is a bit what we do when we listen to a sound and we are not sure what we are listening. So in this chapter, we show that it's actually possible to build time-resolved neural networks, which are models that don't just look the sound all at once, but it processes as the time is coming, as the sound is unfolding over time. In conclusion, to summarize what we have done, let's go back to the second slide of this presentation. We said that in the chapter 2, we tried to find which model were actually linking the superior temporal gyrus, and we found out that the intermediate representation of DNNs were actually the one in better predicting the brain data in this area. And we also unveiled the hyperacoustic space, which is a space that is not full acoustics, but yet not semantic either. So it's a sort of kickstart in understanding what we're actually hearing. In chapter 3, we tried instead to inject semantics into the network. So we taught the network that a dog and a cat are both animal in this case, so the relationships between these entities that are producing the sound. And these helped models actually to capture how humans perceive this similarity between sounds. In chapter 4, instead, we address the common limitation that I always heard in this PhD as well, that a sound is not an image. So we try to build these networks to actually learn how the sound, when the sounds come, to make prediction time frame by time frame. So altogether, this brings us a step closer to understand better how the brain works, but also it can also help us to build more artificial intelligence, that is artificial hearing devices that are actually better in understanding the way, the sounds the way we do. And lastly, I hope that at the end of this presentation, we all understood what happened when we listen to a dog barking or a whine, and we actually understand that they're both from the same dog. And with this, I give the work back to the director, and I thank you all for the attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Esposito. The opposition will be opened by Professor Kotz. Professor Kotz is a professor of neuropsychology and translational neuroscience at Maastricht University.
Thank you, Prorector. Well, first of all, congratulations to this fantastic piece of work. It was a true pleasure to read it. And I particularly was intrigued about chapter 4, which I will ask questions about. But before I do that, I also would like to extend my congratulations to your supervisory team. This was truly a tour of force, and this is clearly dependent on teamwork, and I think that was a fantastic effort. So congratulations to that. So let's go to chapter 4. So I had multiple questions, and I slightly changed my mind while listening to you. So I'm curious about one thing, and that's a question that is general to almost all network modeling, and that is what you feed in, you get out. So in a sense, you choose to pick 3 specific time series, and you picked a particular GUR architecture that fits your design. Is that the maximal approach to take with that type of a model? And what would be an optimal way of pushing this further into the optimal number or range of temporal scales and other types of RNNs? So that's sort of the question that I would like to hear your answers about. First question.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for the compliments and questions. Yes, of course we can improve it, because as we can see also during the chapter, I performed hyperparameter optimizations, exactly because we actually don't know what is the best model that can perform this task. But what we tried here was more to draw the inspiration from, like for example, we started from a buffer, so 3 time scales that I found in literature. So I said, okay, let's start with this one. And I tested the F1 score. So I draw help from the performances of the score. Of course, I wanted to try also more layers, but I got a bit of problems in the computational constraint that was really heavy. And so what I've done here was the maximum that I could have done before the entire system was crashing. And yes, I apologize to have crashed the system a lot of times, actually, while training the network. So I'm pretty confident that what is written here is the maximum that I could have done on this. But if I have to have an idea of how to do differently, I will definitely try now to go and try different approaches like transformers approach, because now we're finding evidences that also the transformers can be linked to some biological plausibility process. So I think I will go in that direction and at least test it, even though transformers are a bit harder to be interpreted. But there's still a way. So in a future work, I would like for sure to test also these kind of architectures.
Would transformers be more difficult to interpret? Can you quickly elaborate on that for me?
Because there's the concept of self-attention, which For neuroscientists also, attention is something completely different. And it's a bit harder, at least for what I found, to actually extract the layer by layer. Because at the end of the day, we want to also interpret the data, the models. And I found that convolutional networks, but in general, these kind of networks, are easier to extract the layers from it. And that's why I still don't have an idea how to extract it. And that's what stopped me to try it in this thesis at the moment.
Fair enough.
Yes.
So another question, and maybe a tiny bit more general, but still in relation to chapter 2. How well do you think current DNNs can truly capture the complexity of an auditory scene?
Yes. Thank you. And I think that, like, when I've written this thesis, what I found really interesting was that when I started to collect the pieces together, I realized that what I was building in chapter 4 should be definitely tested on what I've done in chapter 2. So sometimes I felt like I just drew a timeline without thinking that I could have gone back on things. And I think in this case, I will go and try the network of chapter 4 and try to see if now that we actually are modeling, at least that's what we hope, we don't know, we're modeling what is happening in the early areas. So the network at the first layers is actually doing something really similar to what is happening in the early areas. And I truly believe that then what is happening in the superior temporal gyros will be even more explained by these kind of networks, because with the classic CNNs, we are not doing what is happening in the early auditory areas. We're just performing simple convolutions, and then we're getting the answer. So I will do that.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to the next steps.
Thank you.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor Göbel. He's a professor of cognitive neuroscience at our university.
Thank you, Prorektor. And I also want to first start, like Professor Kotz, with complimenting you to this wonderful piece of work. It was indeed a pleasure to read. And I was impressed how state-of-the-art your capabilities are in AI and linking that to neuroscience, which is a field some call neuro-AI, which you are really a prime example in your work. Because the importance, I think, is in many aspects, but that you seriously try to not just use deep neural nets as tools, but really as models to understand the brain. And this is really fascinating. My questions also, at least the first ones, circulate around chapter 4, because I was there very much impressed that you indeed tackled this very challenging problem of time. And of course, you have the bits and pieces to combine this also with, at some point, with the other models. But in principle, to tackle that in a very state-of-the-art way, you know, having then different kinds of layers, recurrent layers, attention layers. There you have them actually already, similar like used in transformers. But especially there is also a point which I not fully understood and want to ask you now. Because the attention layers you use have the typical query, key, and value components, which is essential for these self-attention layers, bottom-up attention layers. But the point is, usually in the language models, you know, the query is usually a word, and the key is a sentence or something, or some context in time, right? And the values are very important to understand how the weighting is done to kind of get the weighted output. So my question is, can you explain, in your case, what the key, the query is, and especially where the values come from?
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question and for the compliments. Yes, so the attention layer that I tried to use was to focus on the spectral features of the first layer, because we have one layer of convolutional neural network, and then what I tried to do was, since we have really short buffers, so 2, 4, and 8, for example, so 20, 40, and 80 milliseconds, the frequencies are on the y-axis, but the self-attention, normally the classic self-attention, I had to tweak the self-attention here. The classic self-attention focused on the time. But I wanted to give the honors, let's say, of the time to the GRUs, which are gold standard, let's say, to actually capture the temporal dependencies. Yes. So I wanted to have a sort of GRU, let's say, attentional only on the frequencies, And that's why, in this case, the values are actually the frequency bins.
Okay.
So I did a sort of a simple permutation of it. Yeah? So instead of applying the byproduct on the times, I applied it on the y-axis of the spectrogram. So that's...
Thanks very much. That makes it much clearer now. Thanks so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, then I want to move on to a question, because linking a bit your chapters on semantics and on this sequential one, when you have, you focus a lot on the recognition part, classification of continuous semantic features and so on. Mm-hmm. In vision, we are very interested in the moment to also try to model the generative part, also with state-of-the-art AI models, right? So that you have something like a generator, which basically, from a higher level, like semantic level, produces stage-wise something which might end up in predictions of how early features would be. So you could link it to imagery, mental imagery in vision, or hallucinations, something where somehow the system generates something, right? Mm-hmm. And normally you use then decoder type of things, or in a GAN you use a generator, right? And I wondered, and what we try to do in vision is to build models which are more like your static chapter 2 or 3 model, where you have the image as input,
that's right?
Which is actually similar, like this model is very similar like vision models, because you have also usually a static input, and then the images are just different, right? Or the spectrograms. And therefore we could learn here a lot from this. And my question to you is, how would you change this model or enhance the model, develop it further to incorporate also a generative part, right? So that you generate something, we would call it top-down in neuroscience, right?
Okay, I need 1 second. I will. In this case, I will then. Because for having a GAN, we need a generator and discriminator, so double network. Yes. Whilst this one is a convolutional neural network, which is it's a bit different from this kind of structure. But a way maybe to do that will be maybe implement a feedback loop into the network. Yes. So that we have the representation and we try to reconstruct the representation back. So a sort of autoencoder, variational autoencoder, I would say, instead of the GAN. I will not go on the GAN part for this, but I will do it as a variational autoencoder. So I have the SEM-GNN, the semantic GNN, as generated, so the one that knows what to do. And then from the word embedding, try to reconstruct the spectrogram. Again, though I reconstruct the spectrum, I cannot hear the sound back. So
you might play it in the generated spectrogram. You might
exactly. You can generate the spectrum, but we don't have the face to re-listen.
True. But in principle, this is a good approach. And in the brain, since you combine AI and neuroscience, what is typically related to feedback in the brain? If you look at the cortex.
Yeah, the dorsal part. So
I mean not that feedback. I mean, in neuroscience we use also the term layer, but we mean cortical layers, right? For the layers in a deep neural net, we would more use areas, right? There's a chain of areas. But within these areas, there is something within the cortical depths which could separate that. Do you know what I mean?
You mean like...
So you have kind of feed-forward and feedback layers, which are like your network, like you have it now. Yours would be like the middle feed-forward, what you have now. But you could add something which you call the top-down correctly, but you could squeeze it to make it neurally plausible as feedback layers in each area, in each of your layers. You would have another copy, which is then for the feedback, and you could train the higher areas to predict the lower one, and so you get kind of a learning which goes up and down, and then so which is nothing more than training an encoder and a decoder.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
So I guess you are talking about the frontal part of the brain, so like adding this, because you're more talking about like more in a cortical way, so subcortical.
Your chapter 3 model would be quite good for that, because you have there already the semantic, right? And you could indeed use this with the static input also. could think about that. But it's
be-
speculation. I have
Yeah,
no
it
clue
could be
how
cool
to do
to
it.
try, because-
it's just,
yeah.
yeah. But thanks to thinking with me. Do you have still time? No? Okay, then it's up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Back
much.
to the point.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor Shamma. He's a professor of electrical and computer engineering at the University of Maryland, and he will be online, and he should appear on the screen
Yes.
in a second. No, it's
see
actually
it.
Professor Hellers. We'll wait.
Yeah, I
There.
can't see myself on this, but but I trust you. Okay. Well, congratulations for making it all the way to the podium, and I apologize for not being there in person to shake your hands and wish you well. I want to say this is a great piece of work, and like all great pieces of work, it raises a lot more questions than it answers. So one question I have for you, which has a lot of different answers, which I would like you to touch on as we go along, which is the word context. You use it a lot in the thesis, and but I was very curious on two things about context, the most important things that I could not see where they would fit in and how you would deal with them, which is almost all of your work is based on snippets of sound that are 5 seconds, and then you train and do stuff and all of that. But context involves, as you well know, either in time. So when you have the examples of the cow and the siren, if you put them one after the other, it would give cognitive dissonance to the listener. They just don't go together. So there's something about time which gives you a context. When you hear a cow, you will know it's a cow. It's not a siren because you heard birds before and footsteps and so on and so forth. However, so that's one question. How come you don't have the sequential, the predictive, the expectations, the surprise, all of that stuff that is key to the way the human auditory system works and does recognition and semantics? And the other part is the simultaneous context. So when you hear a cow, you usually hear chicken and all kinds of other sounds in a farm and so on. So you have no doubt that this is not a siren. And the same thing with a siren. You would hear car horns and engines and people talking and so on in a cityscape. So when you have mixtures, how do you deal with all this? You never really give a task or you direct instructions and so on. You basically give a clean snippet and ask it to go after one of many, many possible semantics. So deal with that, sequential and simultaneous context.
Highly opponent, thank you for the compliments and the questions. Yeah, one of the main limitations that I discussed in the chapter 4 was that actually, yes, we are using isolated sound. So we are saying, oh, we are doing sound recognition of a sound over time, and everything is beautiful and everything is fantastic. But yes, we have this problem. We have isolated sounds. So what I will do for sure in the future work would be to consider scenes, because that's how we hear the world, as you said. So with the simultaneous context. A way to model it would be for sure to add the predictive part. So because now I'm having a sound, I know only what is happening before, I don't know what is happening next, right? But we don't do like this. We have expectations when we hear sound. So if I'm at the farm, I'm hearing a cow, I will hear also other animals. And a way to do so, for sure, would be, again, as I also said before, a feedback loop in this network. So a way to do it would be to, first of all, we are already dealing with the fact that we can have multiple sounds, because we have three streams for now, hopefully with more computational power, or maybe with a better tweaking of the weights and so on, and strategies, more streams. And every stream actually is tailored to recognize a specific sound. So I'm expecting that, unfortunately I haven't tried it, but I'm expecting that already now with this kind of network as it is, I lost it. Without the feedback loop, I will still see scores going up also of multiple sounds. But I don't know yet, because another thing that I've done here, again, for the sake of simplicity, because again, I'm trying to modeling something that is complicated, and I try to make it easier, like simpler for coding it, is that the loss function that I used is a categorical cross entropy. So these kind of functions learns how to predict only one category, but I will, in the future one, I will go for a binary cross entropy. So I have that also other scores can be between 0 and 1s, because now the constraint is that all the classes has to be that the sum of the probabilities has to be 1. And I think this is another constraint that I added to this network, that it doesn't make it more biologically plausible. So it doesn't take in account the word context, as I said it, both temporal context and simultaneous context. I think I'm a bit limiting the network at the moment with all these constraints.
Well, you're simplifying it too. So, I mean, you would get far more challenging results if you give it noisy snippets of 5 seconds.
Summing up...
In fact, I don't know what you would get if you had a cow and a cat. I'm sorry, a cat and a dog. How does your network work if you give it a mixture? Does it recognize there is a dog?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It would be nice to sum up these sounds and test it again and see, how, like, you know, make it hard for the network to predict.
Mm-hmm. And one last thing, did you consider, you know, there's an echo and it's, sorry about this, but did you consider building semantic chains? A lot like what they do, for example, for speech with the LLMs and all that stuff. All of these ideas are built in context that is not 80 milliseconds, but 800 years. And they have enormous, of course, amount of computational power. Did you think about building semantic chains that predict, for example, for any given sound, what would happen? And you will have somebody else asking you probably about this a little later on today. It would be quite useful.
And another future thing that I for sure want to do is to actually inject the semantic on this network. So before I injected the semantic on the static view of the sound, but I think the very interesting approach would be to have this network that does what is happening in the actual gyros. So in the beginning, so inspired by that, and then also add this information to the semantic, but this leads us to computational costs that are there would be to put, for example, only at the end of the response. That's what I was thinking. At the end of the response, I have the semantics. So I let the network first work as a simple network, so the one that has to categorize a label. But then the last, when I want to give a response, if I ask somebody, what are you hearing? There is a bit of time, and then there is the response. Model only the last part of the response with the context, so with the LLMs or, yeah, other types of semantic models.
Position will now be continued by Professor Heller. She's a professor of psychology at Carnegie Mellon University. She should also appear online now.
Dear candidate, congratulations on a very impressive series of studies and experiments in this area. I would like to ask you, first of all, a very big question, which is, how do you know whether your computational model that you've built is also a model of human processing? And I believe that you think it is under some conditions, but not under others. So I would like you to tell us under what conditions does similarity between your model and the human brain matter, and under what conditions does it not matter for the purposes of using your model? Is similarity between variation in responses enough, sufficient? Representational similarity analysis, for example, is that sufficient? Is predicting the data sufficient? Or does it need to really be working in the same way that the brain does with feed-forward responses on the same time scale and so on?
Hi, esteemed opponent. Thank you for your question and compliments. Yes, this is the big question, actually, because I think I can say that the network is actually approximating, for example, human behavior, because if we think about the task, for example, in the sound dissimilarity, when we ask to the participant to sort based on their acoustics, what the DNN does when we are training the model with the semantic DNN, so in this case with the semantic embeddings, so we want to learn these representations, the semantic model, first of all, the task that was asked to the semantic model was, given a sentence, let's try to predict the next word. That was the n-gram of word-to-vec. So word-to-vec, that's what was the task when they was trained. So the word-to-vec model learns that the next word is somewhat similar to all the words that are coming before. So again, it's a sort of sorting what the model was doing. The DNNs, the categorical DNN, do something similar, because we have sounds, then there are the intermediate representation, and then the response at the end is just taking the sounds and put it into a category, into a box. So based on what the patterns in the intermediate representations are. Okay, then I combine these two. So I have sounds, and then I have the meaning of the words that characterize the sound. And I will say that this task that I asked to the network is somewhat similar to the task that Jordan et al. In 2010 asked to the participants to do. And that's why I try to link the intermediate representations with this behavior, so the similarity metrics of the behavior. It's a way also to give more interpretability to these networks, because we know what the task is, what the network is doing. We know layer by layer what is happening. We have an idea of what is happening. And that's why if I perform RSA, in this case also, we try to predict from the representation of the DNN, we try to predict the behavior. I would say that if the information is in the DNN, there is something that the DNN knows about the data. So we are explaining, in a way, the human behavior. I'm not saying it's the human behavior, because these are patterns. So we're just comparing patterns. But if I can control in the isolated system, I can control all of these, I can be also a bit more sure that what I'm saying is what I've done.
Okay, thank you. I have time for another question. The sounds that you're using are short, 2 seconds or less usually, and your time buffers are even shorter at least for your model in chapter 4. And you noted that it does better on sounds that have more rapid temporal modulations, probably related to that. So to what extent would you expect your results to change if you started to look at longer sounds? Maybe I'll stop there and ask, how does the short sound constrain the results and the conclusions you can make? And then how would it change if you looked at longer sounds?
Okay. For sure, the 5 seconds, as also Professor Sharma said, it's a bit limiting because it's only 5 seconds. For the semantic DNN, I try to tackle this splitting in 1 second and have a lot of examples of 1 second. So, increasing the dataset size. For the chapter 4, I will say that for sure the future work would be to try to remove these constraints of time, so the 5 seconds, and make it more flexible to whatever sound is coming. Of course, we need an upper bound because limitations, computational limitations again. But yeah, I will definitely release the constraint of the time and see if actually then the scores at some point just go down, for example, can be all just saturated at some point, and then we can actually have an upper bound of how long these networks needs, how much time these networks needs. And I will say that this will change based on the nature of the sound. So if it's a transient sound, I guess a gunshot, it will take not that much to recognize because the sound is really short. Or maybe it can create more confusion to the network because the sound is too short as well. Say, was it a gunshot? Were they fireworks? So I think releasing this constraint will help, again, the network to improve the performances.
Thank you. I think I have maybe 30 seconds left. So why do you think a continuous semantic representation in your first chapter, why does that work better than a categorical one when you're blending semantics and acoustics? You have 10 seconds to reply.
So you can answer.
Very.
I'm so sorry, but there's no time left. We have to go on to the next
We can
one.
discuss it later.
Exactly.
When we meet.
Thank you very much. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Hausfeld, who's an assistant professor at the Department of Cognitive Neuroscience at our university.
Thank you, Prorector. Dear candidate, dear Michele, congratulations from my side. Really an impressive piece of work. I'm very interested in all the chapters that you were presenting, as you also maybe remember from a lot of discussions from the group meetings and so on. So congratulations also to your team, basically, that supported the whole endeavor. I have a lot of questions, and I needed to I think I will start with the following one, so which Professor Sharma was already a bit alluding to, and that is that we very often, when we listen, we do make predictions, right? We very often we don't only hear a sound, we are preparing for a sound and to basically have better, more efficient processing of the auditory scene around us. So in which way could you maybe build these this kind of predictions in your system? So there are a lot of studies now, EEG, MEG, ECOG, who are showing, or that are showing that there are that there is something which is called, for example, surprisal, which can work on a semantic level, but it can also work on a pre-semantic level on phonemes and so on. How is there a possibility to include such processes into your system? And then maybe another question would be, do you think that these LLMs that I'm alluding to now, do you think that this is a specific linguistic process, or do we also have it for sounds without the linguistic part? Like, I'm talking about speech stimuli. Do we also have it when we are listening to random natural sounds?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for the compliments and questions. Well, I don't want to reply again with the feedback loop. But
it's a feedback itself.
No, I will try, because throughout the entire PhD, I have seen more computational models than human data. Even though in the first part, yes, I worked with them. I will say that a way to use, for example, as you said, the LLM part, for example. We are thinking that at the moment, the SEMDNN, for example, gives at the end the semantic representation of what is embedded, so acoustics embedded with semantics. And what we said in the beginning, also in the slide, I said that the superior temporal gyrus reveals this hyperacoustic code, no? So we have this something that is not acoustic, but yet not semantic as well. But like us as humans, when we see an action, for example, in that case, so somebody hammering, we already predict that if I'm doing this movement, I will hear the thump, or maybe not. So the surprise part. And this is what is called the theory of embodiment, no, in this part. Mm-hmm. So to implement it actually in the network, for example, the embodiment part, I will say we should move forward and go towards multimodal learning. Mm-hmm. So what we call multimodal learning. So models that have as input images or videos and then sounds. And there are now very state-of-the-art models that can do that, and also take the reasoning part of the LLM and use it as input to actually predict what is happening in the scene. So I will draw some more knowledge from the computer scientists in this case that are pushing a lot on just feed networks with a lot amount of sounds and perform simple audio description, audio captioning task in this case. And I'll try to study those networks and see if I can apply the same framework of chapter 2 to see if we can see also on, as you said, more time-resolved data like EEG, MEG, or intracranial EEG. So I will move forward on this part in the future.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's a good answer, as far as I can judge. Then I want to go a bit into chapter 4, because what is there really nice, and also what Professor Gill has already mentioned, you have out of a sudden temporal resolution, right, of your model. So this shouts to applications and analyses of time-resolved data acquisition methods, right? So in which way, if you would brainstorm about an experiment, so in which way would you combine these time-resolved acquisition methods with maybe such a model?
Yeah, there is a work from Giordano 2 years ago, about 2021, about performing what he called the spatio-temporal representation of similarity analysis. So, since in this case again, the task I will record, not myself, I guess. I will get intracranial EEG data or MEG data of people. Subjects listening to sounds, and then see the representation over time. And then I will link that one to the time-resolved neural network and applying this spatio-temporal RSA. So per each time step, I try to see the comparison between what is happening in that 10 milliseconds, for example, and the 10 milliseconds of the layers. And I will perform the comparison in that way and see a sort of time-resolved R-square in that case, I would expect.
Yeah, and the very final question is, this sounds a bit like a bit of a static processing in some way, right? So you have, let's say, one representation which remains and you test whether it changes over time. How do you deal with the processing delays that we have with EEG, right? We have something like an event-related potential when something is happening, so there are delays in the system for the very same representation, and there can be overlap also.
Yeah, these kind of delays are actually a bit modeled in the network with the buffers. We have the 3 buffers. The first buffer fills first, but then the other 2 takes time to fill. So we have already a sort of delay implemented into the network. But probably a better approach would be to have even more buffers and let them, like some buffer make them go super slow and some super faster, for example, feel super fast. So yeah, that's how I will approach.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Hausfeld. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Murel. She's an associate professor at the Maastricht Center for Systems Biology and at the Department of Cognitive Neuroscience here at Maastricht University.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, dear Michele, also from my side, compliments on your thesis. It was a pleasure to read it, and I learned a lot of things about what to me is a relatively new field. It's really nice to see, especially the link, I think, between these networks, this AI field, and then applied to auditory neuroscience. For me, that's very nice to see. I would also, of course, like to extend my congratulations to your supervisory team. Your thesis also generated questions with me. And to start off with, I would actually like to call on one of your paranymphs to read out the second proposition.
The second proposition, deep learning models are powerful tools for decoding neural activity, but their interpretability remains a major challenge in neuroscience.
Thank you. My question relates to this. You, in chapter 2, nicely show that using these models, you learn something about what happens in SDG, right? So, which you call hyperacoustic representation. Mm-hmm. But also already in that chapter, kind of criticize these type of approaches for really learning something mechanistic about the brain. So to what extent do you think, not just maybe from chapter 2, but maybe also from what you've learned in chapter 3, chapter 4, you can get to mechanistic understandings of what the brain is actually doing, or how humans actually process sound? And if maybe not yet in the work that you've done, do you think that using deep learning, you could get to more mechanistic understanding? Maybe doing follow-up analysis? And then finally, and I'm happy to repeat questions because I'm asking a lot of things in a row now. You do also, and I found that very interesting in chapter 2 already, indicate that in SCG, what might be happening on a mechanistic level is that there are some primitive dimensions that represent these sounds that could be related maybe to the features of sound sources. And you suggest that follow-up work might be needed to test this hypothesis. Would such follow-up work then also include DNNs, or would you do that in a different way?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for compliments and question. Yes. Yeah, can you tell me a bit more the mechanismic perspective? What do you mean?
So you show in chapter 2 that the representation is somewhere between acoustics and semantics, hyperacoustics.
Yes.
But what is that representation? Okay. What are these neurons doing that sit there?
Yeah, they're what I tried to explain there was that, so we are hearing an action, for example, like a hammering in this case. So I hear the thump. So we believe that what is happening there, so in the hyperacoustic space, so in the SDG, is that we already know the nature of the sound, so the thumping. But we don't know who's making this sound, like what is making this thumping. Because this is based on the fact that the iron part hit the surface. So the sound that is produced by the surface, it's what we are acknowledging at that stage of the brain. But then when actually it goes to the frontal area, so again, I'm doing this sort of hierarchical process, even I guess everything happens in one go, we are already having an idea. So we have a sort of a push from the brain in that area that is telling you, oh, something is thumping, what it is, and then boom, there is a number. So I will say that's what is hyperacoustic spaces for me. So I'm having already a hint of what is it, using all the information from the inertial gyrus and the planum porale and planum temporale.
Okay, so I understand then that you already at SCG, you would assume some interpretation of sound already there that is beyond acoustics, but that is not yet the full interpretation. That is how you would see. Is that correct? And
when I show the Venn diagram, we see that the DNNs actually capture a lot of acoustics and a small part of semantics. And we believe that that small part of semantics is the part that is actually we're already realizing what the object is. Not what the object is, but what is the sound source. Like there is a two-surface seating, for example.
Okay. And how would you test this hypothesis? Would you use DNNs again to test it, or what kind of experiments would you run?
We already in our group we already tried to actually collect behavioral data, trying to disentangling the acoustic from semantics. So we show the similar sounds, acoustically similar sounds with similar semantic sounds, and we let the participant. So now we're still on the behavior. We let participant rates if a sound is more acoustically similar or more semantically similar. And I think already there we are doing what we believe is happening in the SDG. No? So in that case, again, probably I would use again categorical networks for this part to see if there is better link now between this behavioral data and that one, and then we add the semantic information in it and see if the model moves towards the semantic more or more towards the acoustic part. So I would use this data already collect. So again, I'm not collecting data.
No, that is right. Okay, so you'd basically change the sound input and the task as well to see if you can actually
sounds in this case, which is also what happened in the 2010 with the Giordano data. Yeah, data.
Okay, then switching gears a little bit. I have a question on your introduction. So you state there that the transformations from acoustic signals to meaningful representations of sound, sources or sound events begin in primary auditory cortex and adjacent belt areas. And I would like to ask you, is that not already a little bit earlier? So we know, for example, from auditory neuroscience that in inferior colliculus there are spectrotemporal features extracted. Should we not look earlier in the system?
You may briefly answer that question.
Actually, I wanted to ask if you can repeat it.
Before auditory cortex, sounds are processed in an inferior colliculus and in the thalamus as well. Mm-hmm. Should we look into those representations as well?
That would be super interesting, actually, to test also this hypothesis, because again, we know that in the inertial gyrus already we are having low-level features, which are pitch and loudness. Maybe these even easier features can be actually linked on those areas. So I will definitely try to extend also this analysis.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Michele Esposito, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
Thank you.
Please all rise.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Get the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. 'Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Michele Esposito, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict, and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Formisano is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Please all rise.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principle of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority vested on us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Michele Esposito, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university. Dear Dr. Esposito, dear Michele, congratulations to you, your family and friends on this great achievement and important step in your career. You did an excellent job. We were all very proud of you, of your growth as a scientist, your thesis and also your defense today. Congratulazioni a te e alla tua famiglia per questo grande successo e per questo passo importante nella tua carriera. Hai fatto un lavoro eccellente e siamo molto orgogliosi di te, della tua crescita come ricercatore, della tua tesi e della tua difesa di oggi. Please accept this congratulation not only from me and Giancarlo, your co-promoter, but also as a collective wish from all those we have worked closely with over the years. Bruno Giordano, you mentioned several times, who played a key role in your supervision as well as Maria, Gai's team, Beatrice, and the group in Marseille with Marie, Giorgio, Christian, with whom we have collaborated very intensely over these years. So it's a collective congratulations for all of us. Your journey in Maastricht began 6.5 years ago, I think, in November 2018, together with Vincenza, that I see here. You both arrived as Erasmus exchange students from the University of Naples, my home university, so you studied basically the same thing that I studied as well. And I clearly remember your initial struggles, coping with the cold, right? In November, finding decent housing, which is not easy, and also getting familiar with a completely new topic for you, which was indeed like what became then the topic of your master thesis and now the PhD thesis, probably also of your research in the next few years. This is how it goes, like you start with something and you're stuck with it for long. And I remember that around the time, I just started experimenting with these DNN models. And I proposed to both of you to explore this network together and to work on the master thesis for that. And admittedly, I was also at the very beginning of that, right? So I was also not super familiar with the topic. So it became like a shared learning process, right? So reading articles, coding, making sense of data sets, software, hardware, and all things that actually are normally quite cumbersome at the beginning of a new research line, right? But you both did very well, and actually you finished your thesis very, very well. And then there was the question, so what's next, right? So once you finish with your master diploma, so what do you do next? And I remember our informal talks about the pros and cons of doing a PhD versus working in industry, right? So there was always this yes or no. And I also, I looked back and I found an email from you that I found it still quite funny, that was like very direct and saying, assuming I do a PhD here, would I get to work on AI and data science or only neuroscience? So, because actually my dream is to go to work for Google or Apple or, like some of the high-tech industry. And I could not find my answer to this. Probably I did not answer or was not super friendly. But, I also found another email a few days later that was saying, forget about it. Yeah, I do. If there is a PhD position, then I do want to come and do a PhD. And at that time, together with Giancarlo, we had this proposal that was approved, right? And so we were actually looking for a PhD position. And there was the other issue that was not super trivial because both of you, both Vincenzo, you applied, you were both very good, and so we had to make this choice of one over the other. At the end, Vincenzo decided to stay in Naples and work in a company, so the decision was taken, and you joined as a PhD student. And then, so you returned to Maastricht, this time for a longer period, and you arrived right after the Carnival in 2020, right, in March 2020, and just 2 days before the first big COVID lockdown, right? I mean, so basically it was like, Michele, welcome, here is the office, go home. like go home, stay confined at home, because there is not much we can do. And so, and that was a period of struggle and loneliness for many. But I mean, you just have moved to a new place, right? I mean, so like it was like really quite difficult. You are also a very social and extroverted person, so to be confined at home, this was actually quite a struggle. In all bad things, there are also good things, right? I mean, so I think this period at home also shaped your PhD work, right? Because initially we were planning to do some more experimental work, but then given the circumstances, we decided, okay, let's go all computational, right? I mean, so let's not collect new data, but let's see whether we can reanalyze all data and all things like that. And actually, I think you did spend some of your time at home together with 350,000 sounds and their labels to make sense of them. I think at that point is where you also learned that where big data is not necessarily good data, right? I mean, so that actually there is a lot of garbage in, in a lot of the big data, and that some quality checking and refining is necessary if you do want to go scientific work, right? Probably not if you want to solve a problem, but if you want to do science, then it's actually difficult. And there were like all these endless Zoom session with me, Bruno, Giancarlo, like debugging code online and all kinds of things like this. So this was not a great period. But then, after the COVID period, I think you were like an animal let out of a cage, right? I mean, so you could go out from home, so you suddenly, starting to enjoy being like with other people. You've been very social. I know things from the office that I will not say here, but that were very funny and actually pretty wild, I would say. But I actually could witness really this big change. So I mean, you started to basically. I think I haven't had any other student that has done so many courses as you have done. So like English, scientific writing, Dutch, project management, Neuromatch, whatever was there. You participated in a course, which I think it was also very good. And also starting traveling, right? I mean, so the ICAC in Magdeburg that we were together, the DK's challenge in Nancy with guys that I see there, with an adventurous trip back watching horror movies on a bus, Lauri's workshop at ICASP 2023 in Greece, that I think was actually very nice. It shaped actually Michele quite a lot. So thanks, Lauri, for your invitation there. And last summer also the computational cognitive neuroscience conference in Boston, right? And so. And that's outside the work, right? Weekends in London, Berlin, and Naples to get the food, of course, and cooking classes, padel, marathon in Brighton and Sevilla. I don't know. I mean, this is just little part of what I know. So I can imagine that there is much more there. So you've been super active, not only in the work, but also in the social things and, like joining all the other people. But I think like the last visit last year to Bruno's lab in Marseille for 2 months, actually also deserves a chapter on its own, I would say. Officially, it was to refine the CRNN model, so chapter 4, so this was already working, but okay. And to analyze the MEG data, right? It did not happen before the thesis, but it's actually going on now. But unofficially, it was an escape south to the sun, to the sea. I'm not saying it was a holiday, but sort of, right? So, and all was very much documented with photos from the boat, the island, the beach, rigorously shared on our Slack page, right? We have a joint Slack pages, and so we were always have to look at these photos of Bruno or you on the beach, and that was actually not great fun. In sum, Michele, as you wrote in your acknowledgement, in science, like in a marathon, you need commitment, perseverance, and willpower. But unlike a marathon, in science, there are many intermediate finishes before the final one, right? In the marathon, it's only important to get there. Today, you are at an important one. You have shown that you have grown as an excellent scientist, and also I want to remark that beyond your own work, you have contributed to successful grants, helped your colleagues, so always with the smile and the friendliness. So this is actually a very nice feature of you. You have already proven also your adaptability. So in the last year, you have been working as a postdoc with Michel Dumontier at the IDS. So you are working actually on AI application of health science. So really, which shows really your flexibility, switching from neurosciences to health, and indeed working with generative models and trying to generate new synthetic data. And I also, like a not so anonymous source from IDS told me that you are becoming a much better computer scientist by the day. A year ago, you had some problem with struggling with multi-GPU setups and all kinds of things like this, while now you're perfectly familiar with that. I am finished. So now at this point, we could go back to the question from your email before the PhD, right? I mean, so neuroscience or data science, what do you do? What do you want to do? And the answer is that it doesn't matter too much because you would be good at both, from my perspective. But likely, it seems that you made a choice and that probably, like for the next few years, you will join Bruno's lab in Marseille, right? I mean, so at the end, the sun, the sea, the aperitif on the beach, and maybe the price of the fish food and the seafoods maybe prevails over Maastricht. But I think it's actually a very good choice. So with this, I wish you really a very good luck for the futures. We are in contact, we stay in contact, and this congratulations, like I said before, comes from me, Giancarlo, but also everyone else that worked with you in these years.
Thank you, Professor Fumisano. Dear Dr. Esposito, also on behalf of Maastricht University, I congratulate you with your degree that you have acquired. I hereby close the academic ceremony. How do we proceed now? We will actually stay here together with our guests online to take some pictures, and I'd also like to ask the family in the first row to stay with us. And the rest of the audience, I'd like to ask to go to the rafter, where there will be a reception.
A posso.